Nate, hi, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So tell us please about what assets of Russians do we know, that what do they owe in London?
Sure. So the short answer is rather a lot. Their investments are mostly in real estate. They own, an estate agent a couple of years ago estimated that they buy 1 in 5 of every house that's worth over £10 million. That's a significant chunk of London's luxury real estate market. The Deutsche Bank has also estimated that of about $1.5 billion that's laundered into London every year, about half of that comes from Russia.
How can you explain why London is such a popular place among Russian oligarchs and businessmen to buy assets and to keep money there?
Sure. Well, it has what Russia doesn't. It has the rule of law. We all know Russian oligarchs like to steal from Russian public budgets, but it's not safe for them to keep that money in Russia. They have political rivals. They can't rely on the courts to protect those assets once they've got them. So what they do is they like to move them out, usually through anonymous sort of offshore jurisdictions, and they like to get them into safe real estate safety deposit boxes, basically in London. And what they then have access to is an amazing professional services industry. They can protect their money, they can keep it in luxury real estate, but they could also rely on the courts to back up their ownership of this stuff. And then they can also protect their reputations. They can employ lawyers and PR firms to shut down any criticism of them in the UK because it has particularly bad libel laws. So it's a really, in a way that even the United States isn't, it's a really perfect place for them. And it's also a short flight back to Moscow if they want to go back as well.
And do you know what assets will be freezed? And also, Prime Minister Theresa May made her announcement some days ago. Have there been any developments and have there been any assets freezed?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure that it's something we would hear about publicly at this stage. So at the moment, my understanding is, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'll make that qualification, but under the Criminal Finances Act that was passed last year, they can freeze assets, but this would be done sort of quietly. It's not a public operation. What they've agreed to in the past couple of days is to add a sort of global Magnitsky amendment to a money laundering bill that's going through Parliament, which would enable them to make public those measures that they would be taking. So I'm not aware that anything's been done yet, and I'm sure they're looking very carefully at it. I know that the National Crime Agency, which is sort of Britain's version of the FBI, I suppose, it's a new agency, and they've been looking very carefully at this issue. They have a new power. It's called unexplained wealth orders, and what this means is if a wealthy Russian or someone suspicious from any country around the world turns up in London with a suspicious amount of wealth, they're a public official with a small salary, but they're buying houses worth £50 million, the British government can say, hey, you need to explain to us where you got this money, or we'll take you to court and we'll restrain the assets and potentially even seize them if you don't provide satisfactory proof. And that's a really important development. And I think the government might well be asking the National Crime Agency to allocate more resources to that, perhaps, in response to what's happened.
How this whole situation will influence Russian economy, and what influence it will have on Putin's inner circle?
Sure. Well, we know that, without naming names, we know that many of Putin's inner circle enjoy lives of luxury in the West, in London, other cities too. And they're very keen to protect that, and they've been given free rein to do so as long as they don't interfere in politics back home. So if the British government, because of Putin's behavior, if the British government starts coming after their assets, they're going to turn around to Mr. Putin and say, hey, we had a deal. You said we'd be left alone to enjoy our lives in the West, but you've been provoking the West, and now our assets are under threat. So this could cause some discord within Putin's inner circle, I think. As to the sort of effect on the wider Russian economy, you saw Russia floating a load of Eurobonds on the British stock market the day all this happened. So what we're looking at the moment is quite targeted measures against individuals. The British government hasn't really talked about clamping down on some of the sort of state-linked commercial interests that operate on Britain's stock exchanges at the moment. So that might be an avenue they would pursue. Again, I'm not an expert on that area, but that would certainly be something I would think they would look at carefully.
British allies, the United States, supported the decision of United Kingdom to expel Russian diplomats from London. How do you think? Will they support it in any other way or only by words? And is there any possibility that US will also freeze the assets of Russian businessmen and oligarchs?
Sure. Well, it was great that the US and other allies came out and stood shoulder to shoulder with the UK. The US has done more than it looks like. You see a lot of headlines, Trump loves Russia, and so on and so on. Actually, many sanctions have been passed in the past year. There's a lot of pressure behind the scenes. There's a lot of tension. The day it happened, some sanctions were issued which are actually unrelated to the incident in Britain. They were in retaliation for the election hacking in the US presidential elections in 2016. But if you look at the laws that Congress have passed, particularly the Countering America's Adversaries to Sanctions Act from last year, that mandates the White House to do some pretty extraordinary things in terms of standing up to Russian financial influence in the US. The problem is they've only gone sort of maybe even a third of the way on all these measures that they've been asked to do. So they were asked to publish a list of Kremlin-linked oligarchs and the illicit assets that they're keeping in America and elsewhere. So of course what we got was just unfortunately it sounds like they did a lot of research behind the scenes and perhaps that went into the classified version, but publicly all we saw was a sort of copy and paste job from a Forbes list of oligarchs. So the framework is very much here in the US. It needs political will and action to follow up on. And I think the tone you've heard from the White House in the last few days gives us hope that might be on the horizon.
And finally, what influence this whole situation can have in the future? What influence and what consequences it can have in European democratic countries and also in Russia?
Sure. Well, I hope this is, we've worked on this issue of, malign sort of behind-the-scenes influence of the kleptocracy industry for several years now. But we have never experienced the level of interest in particularly illicit financial networks that's going on at the moment. And if there is, I believe that this is also a process of democracy exposing or finding out its flaws and starting to do something about them. So the best outcome that could happen from all of this would be if we took a look not so much at the individuals, the oligarchs and so on, who we want to target. That needs to be done, that's fine. But we need to look deeper at the system that enables them to steal money in the first place and move it into the West, and then use it for nefarious purposes when it's there. That means we need to look very carefully at the offshore financial system, of which is not really offshore. We all know it's run from Western financial centres like London, like New York. And I hope that this is the beginning of a broader conversation which will, rather than clamping down on a few individuals who will just be replaced by others, this will help attack the whole system by which authoritarian regimes like Putin's manage to spread their financial influence.
Nate, thank you very much for explaining this situation. З нами на зв'язку був Нейт Сіблі із Інституту Хадсона. З ними поговорили про рішення Британії заморозити російські активи, про те, який це матиме вплив, і також про те, що робитимуть Сполучені Штати.